Welcome everyone to this midweek teaching. And today what we're going to work on is one specific verse for one specific reason. We're going to talk about, should we have 66 books in our Bible, or should we have 73 books in our Bible? This is a controversy because I'm going to suggest that up until around 1500, when the Protestant movement came about, most people seem to believe since then that the Catholics, if you will, added 7 books to the Bible. But actually, it's the other way around. There was at least 73 up until the time of 1500-ish, and it was the Protestant movement that removed 7 books. When they removed the 7 books, they were all Old Testament books. Lots of information, if you will, that we could get from essentially the Old Testament, if you will, the Jewishness, right? Since our Messiah is indeed Jewish, I'm going to suggest that that's an interesting thing that you would remove 7 books of what would have been history even in 1500. So it always perplexed me that those books were removed. But one day I stumbled upon a specific word, and that word was quoted out of 2 Maccabees. We're going to review Hebrews 11, chapter 11. It's called the faith chapter, and verse 35 specifically, because there's a specific word that's in Hebrews 11:35 that is quoted directly out of 2 Maccabees. And I'm going to make a suggestion that if the Hebrews writer and the book of Hebrews is inspired, and after all, we must believe that as Christians, that it's in our New Testament Bible, if the Hebrews writer is quoting out of 2 Maccabees, would it not stand to reason that 2 Maccabees must be inspired as well? So why don't we talk about, is the book 2 Maccabees, is it inspired, and do I have any textual proof? And I'm going to suggest that I do. So let's start there and see where this goes, because ultimately this is going to be, if nothing else, it'll be informative for you, and hopefully it'll help you make a decision on whether or not you want to study some more Old Testament texts. All right, so let's go to the scripture. So here we are in Bible Hub, by the way, and it's Hebrews 11:35, as I mentioned. And in the King James Bible, folks, and this is the one I'll just kind of focus on for a moment here, it says this: women received their dead raised to life again, and others were tortured. Now, believe it or not, that's a very unique way to speak of any kind of torment, because typically King James says torment, right? Sometimes it'll say punishment, but rarely do we see the word torture. I'm going to suggest to you that's part of the reason why this word is tortured rather than torment or punishment. So, and again, he says, and others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Interestingly enough, I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to show you how this word was rendered in this specific Bible right here. I think this is called the Douay-Rheims Bible. Notice he says, but others were racked. Do you see the difference there? I also discovered that word in this Bible right here from David Bentley Hart. He's a Greek scholar, and he rendered this word, I believe if I recall correctly, either the rack or the wheel of the rack, something of this nature. So it drew my attention when I was doing this study. Why are they saying racked? And why is King James using the word tortured rather than torment like it usually typically does? Well, allow me to show you why. It's because it's a very unique word, okay? So here's the word, tortured. All right. Now, what I want you to do is notice this word right here in the middle, T-Y-M-P-A-N-I. That's tympany. All right. So in this word tympany, notice it says tortured here as well. Well, but that's a drum. A tympany is a drum. Well, you're going to find out that it's a very specific type of torture, one that you will not find in the 66 books of the Old Testament. You will only find this word in 2 Maccabees. So allow me to click on this. And as you can see, there's only one occurrence. And it says tortured here, Hebrews 11:35. So let's go take a look at the meaning of the word. And as you can see, tupanidzo To beat a drum, to torture by beating. I torture, notice, break on the wheel. This is why Mr. David Bentley Hart used the word wheel, if I recall correctly, and to beat to death. It's a specific kind of punishment. So as you dig into this a little bit more, as you can see, it talks about a timpani drum, originally meant to beat a drum, and was later used for torturing someone in conjunction with the beating of a drum. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? Think about, if you happen to know any drummers, their rack of toms. That's what we would call it, all right? So moving forward, as you can see, all right, it's talking about to beat a drum, right? To torture with the tympanum. It's very specific. It's not just a general, like a whipping or a, smacking around or a stoning or even a crucifixion, right? Because those are specific types of tortures. This one is done specifically with a wheel, something that looks much like a drum. And as you can see, this is the only spot where it was taken from. 2 Maccabees 6:19. That's not in your 66 books. In your Old Testament, if you have a 66-book Bible, you will not have 2 Maccabees. So, what is this really? What am I talking about? Well, I'm saying that if the Hebrews writer is quoting out of 2 Maccabees, why is it not in our Bible, right? Because I could certainly make the argument that if this word is being quoted out of 2 Maccabees, then that would have to mean that 2 Maccabees is inspired, all right? And we're going to look into this a little bit, okay? And this is how they perform this specific kind of torture. Excuse me. And as you can see, it's referring to this drum idea, right? To stretch on an instrument of torture resembling a drum, and thus beat to death. Okay? So, I'm actually going to take a moment here and Google images of timpani, okay? Just to kind of give you kind of a, sorry, my bad. Should have put an M there. All right? So, notice it's like a drum like this, okay? And notice the sticks on there, right? So what they would do is stretch out someone on this kind of a wheel, a drum, and you were essentially the skin. And then they would use instruments and start throwing them, essentially beating you. It's an unfortunate situation, but I have to explain that to you. So this is something that is not found anywhere but in 2 Maccabees. So I'm going to take you to 2 Maccabees 6:19 because I want to kind of tell you this is a 2 Maccabees quote. You will not find this timpani instrument, if you will, in the Old Testament, because that's what the writer's quoting from, the Old Testament. So going over to 2 Maccabees, here we go. And I am going to have to use the Catholic edition of the Bible. Typically I use Old King James, but Old King James doesn't have 2 Maccabees. So we're going to take this opportunity to read this section. And the first thing I want you to see, it's about a martyrdom of Eleazar. All right. Now, Eleazar is a very interesting word because it means this. Okay. So I'm again going to go to the Old Testament. And as you can see, there it is. It says Eleazar. I'm going to click on this. And Eleazar means God has helped. Okay. God has helped. So I'm going to suggest to you, even the man's name in this particular martyrdom is very important. And I think you're going to see that this is an important lesson that I think we could have actually used in the last few years. All right. So let's read this a little bit. By the way, this is historical Jewish history. This has to do with the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, where he was basically a tyrant and he was trying to get all the Jews to basically reject their religion, their laws of God, to turn their back on Yahweh, their God, okay? So, and this is prior to Christ, of course, all right? So, Eleazar, one of the scribes in high position, a man now advanced in age and of noble presence, was being forced to open his mouth to eat swine's flesh, and that was against their kosher laws. But he, welcoming death with honor rather than life with pollution, went up to what? The rack. Do you see that? See how that's translated properly? Just like in this Dewey's version here, they were racked. right? The person was racked. So it's very specific to this person in 2 Maccabees. All right, so that's one of the main reasons why I'm bringing this in. But while we're here, let's get edified by this. And again, I'm going to repeat this. If it's in the book of Hebrews that we say is inspired, then the writer of Hebrews is quoting 2 Maccabees. So you're going to have to make your own decision. Can you have a New Testament epistle that you claim is inspired that's quoting things that are not inspired? I'll let you make the decision. I've made mine. If he's quoting from 2 Maccabees, that's where I should read it. Okay, and notice what he was saying. Others were racked, not accepting deliverance that they might find a better resurrection. All right, and that's exactly what you're going to see here with this gentleman. So he went up to the rack of his own accord. See, and that's exactly what Hebrews is talking about. Spitting out the flesh. He wouldn't eat the swine's flesh. As all ought to go who have the courage to refuse things that is not right to taste, even for the natural love of life. See, it's even, look, there's a natural love of life, but there's some things you should not sell your soul for. That's the message here. Beautiful message. Those who were in charge of that unlawful sacrifice took the man aside because of their long acquaintance with him, and they privately urged him to bring meat of his own providing, proper for him to use, and to pretend that he was eating the flesh of the sacrificial meal that had been commanded him by the king, and that would have been Antiochus the tyrant. So what they were basically saying is they basically liked this man, okay? And so they said, well, look, just bring your own meat that you're okay with, and then put that in the mouth, and then we'll just pretend you're eating the king's meat. See? We'll make it look good. You won't be breaking your law, right? But the king will think you are. See? Everybody will be happy, and then we won't have to do this to you. Okay? So that by doing this, he might be saved from death. And again, going back to Hebrews, just to kind of reconfirm, right? Others were racked, not accepting deliverance. He could have been saved. All he had to do was pretend he was eating swine flesh while he was stuffing some chicken in his mouth or whatever, right? But no, he denies this, okay? So it's right out of 2 Maccabees. And so he says this, and by the way, so that by doing this, he might be saved from death and be treated kindly on account of his old friendship with them. Because these men liked this man, okay? He had a good reputation. He was an older man. You're going to find out he's 90. And it says this, but making a high resolve worthy of his years. Think about that, worthy of his years, right? God had given him a really good long life. And the dignity of his old age and the gray hairs that he had reached with distinction and his excellent life, even from childhood. So clearly a good, decent man here, devoted to God. And moreover, according to the holy God-given law, he declared himself quickly, telling them to send him to where? Hades. Is he saying, send me to hellfire forever and infinity and beyond? No. So this also attaches to the idea, because Old King James, they would have translated this to hell. It's not hell. He's saying, send me to the grave. I'm willing to die. That's what he's saying. And that's what Hades is. Okay? It's not a place of infinite torture. Okay, and it would help you understand that, wouldn't it, if you had this version? Then, of course, in verse 24, it continues, it says, such pretense is not worthy of our time of life, he said. For many of the young might suppose that Eleazar in his 90th year, that's where you learn that he's 90. And notice what he's saying. For many of the young might suppose that Eleazar in his 90th year had gone over to an alien religion. And through my pretense, for the sake of living a brief moment longer, they would be led astray because of me. So what he's doing here, he's saying, if I make it even look like I'm bowing the knee to this, I'm going to set an example that I've departed from my Lord and my God, who I've served all my life. In exchange for what? An extra few years? Now, listen, guys, I don't want to pick on people too much, but there was some folks, for example, that let's say may have been 65 or 68 or 71, that were not in position of losing their jobs because they were already retired. And maybe a good amount of them had already had their houses paid off, and maybe they already have a decent pension coming in. Wouldn't it have been nice in the last few years, if you were kind of against the tyranny that you saw in your area, to have some of those folks with a lot of wisdom, a lot of experience, and have some courage and say, hey, you're not supposed to be doing this, right? Because they had a lot less to lose, right? It would be nice to have people. And again, listen, I'm not an absolutist. If someone did not have the health or the capacity, then it's different. But I think there was a lot of people that were retired, 65, 67, 72, 75, that could have had at least the resolve to say, no, I'm not participating in this. You're not going to force this kind of stuff. Or, I'll take it, but you're not going to force my family. Kind of have that kind of resolve to set a good example for the next generation. We could have used this text for that rather than, the people who interpret Romans 13 in that special little way. So what I'm suggesting to you, wouldn't it have been nice to have this as a great example of how someone who's well on in years, right, and firm and has lived a really faithful life, hey, continue to be faithful. What are you going to do? Trade it in for an extra few years, right? And that's the kind of overall picture here. And I think this would have been a pretty inspiring text to use. But anyways, we'll continue. Notice how much he cares about not only the laws of God, but the kind of example he's going to leave behind. That's a great text. It really is. And he says, and through my pretense, for the sake of living a brief moment longer, they would be led astray because of me while I defile and disgrace my old age. See, he doesn't want to disgrace his old age. Why? Well, because he's lived an excellent life. And maybe that's another thing, right? Oh, there's none righteous. Well, sounds to me like he had reached with distinction in his excellent life, even from childhood. So that's pretty different than some of the theologies we have there these days, right? That might fly against some of the theologies, right? That could be a bit of a problem for some folks. Just throwing that out there. But the Hebrews writer is quoting from this section. So let's continue. Even if for the present I would avoid the punishment of mortals, yet whether I live or die, I will not escape the hands of the Almighty. So basically he's saying, listen, I could live a little bit longer, but sooner or later, I'm going to go meet my maker. I want to meet him with courage and letting him know that I was faithful even unto the end. What kind of courage is he showing here? Isn't that an inspiring text? I think it is. Therefore, by bravely giving up my life now, I will show myself worthy of my old age and leave to the young a noble example of how to die a good death. Is there such thing as a good death? In my theology, I have to tell you, I do believe, and we're going to move forward. And, from my position, from an eschatology point of view, the death that the Bible is speaking of is not physical death. That was what is a covenantal death that Adam experienced when he disobeyed God. He broke the covenant, and Christ came to bring the covenant back, right? Okay, so I'm going to suggest to you that this could connect to a good death idea as well, okay? Because a good death is a good death, right? And he says to die a good death willingly and nobly for the revered and holy laws. When he had said this, he went at once, where? There it is again, to the rack, all right? And once again, I'm going to show you how the one that was rendered properly was this Bible. Now, by the way, little side note, I'm not telling you you can't, read the other ones. I still predominantly use, I still have ESV and, Old King James, New King James, no problem. I'm not saying that, but it is a really handy tool to sometimes, if you have some questions, take a look at how some of the other Bibles are rendering the words. And if they're different, you might want to look into them, right? Because we have these types of things at our fingertips. So why not use them, right? We'll continue again. So when he had said this, he went at once to the rack. Those who a little before had acted toward him with goodwill now changed to ill will. In other words, the ones who said, hey, just eat some chicken and we'll pretend it's the pork, right? Or excuse me, eat some chicken and we'll pretend you're eating the pork, right? Now they're ticked because he went, nah, thanks, but no thanks, right? And allow me to again say, and this is just not an absolute statement, but during the whole, jab passport thing, I was telling people, look, if you make it look like you've participated, even though you really didn't, that's actually all they need. All the bad people really need is you to play the game. Even if you didn't really get it, but you pretend that you did, well, that can be just as damaging, right? So this guy went all the way with it, saying, no, I'm not going to pretend and make this guy think I'm actually complying with his orders. I'm not going to do that. No, I'm going to comply with my conscience and my faith and my belief in God. And I believe that I will attain a better resurrection. Okay. And that's what it said in Hebrews, right? Okay. So because of these words that he had uttered, they were, in their opinion, sheer madness. So they basically go, hey, this guy's nuts, right? Why? Because he's willing to give up his life, right? For what? For his conscience sake, for his belief, for his faith towards God. When he was about to die under the blows, he groaned aloud and said, "It is clear to the Lord in his holy knowledge that, though I might have been saved from death, I am enduring terrible sufferings in my body under this beating, but in my soul I am glad to suffer these things because I fear him." And this ties right into with what Jesus says, when he talks about, don't fear those who all they can do is kill the body, right? That's all they can do. And that ties into exactly what Jesus was saying. What this gentleman is saying here ties right into what Jesus was saying. In fact, I might suggest, right, God has helped, right? God is help also is another way to translate Eliezer. This is a picture where Jesus goes, for example, to the cross. This man goes to the rack, knowing that he's going to die, but he has faith that he will attain a better resurrection. This is a really wonderful text, I think, for us Christians, right? I think we should really have this text in our midst. All right. And he talks about fearing him more than the tyrant, fearing God more than the tyrant, more than death itself, right? That's what he's showing here in this text. So in this way he died, leaving in his death an example of nobility and a memorial of courage, not only to the young, but look at this, but to the great body of his nation. What did Christ do for us? Did he not set up the example of nobility and the memorial of courage and love and grace and faith in God, right? And he became what? He became a great example, if you will, right? To the body of the world, because all the nations belong to God under Christ. So, this is a very inspirational text. Not only is it inspirational because the Hebrews writer is quoting out of 2 Maccabees, but the text itself is a wonderful text. So, let me show you while we're on the topic of, the difference between torment, punishment, and this word torture, because again, as we were mentioning before, this was a one occurrence situation in the New Testament, right? So let's go over to, for the sake of information, I just want to make sure I got this. Yeah, I got that one in there for you. Okay. So again, this is a torture, right? This is a specific kind. Break on the wheel, beat to death, that kind of stuff, okay? Well, in Matthew 25:46, all right, it's a very famous passage that people like to use. There's this eternal punishment. Okay, notice the word is different. It's not eternal torture. Notice that, right? The word is kolossin. It's a different word than the word tympany or tympanizo, right? It has no word like it. There's no tympany in the word, right? It's completely different. Different number, different deal. So we'll click on this for a moment and notice what it says here, punishment, okay? And notice what the actual definition is. It's correction. Right? Chastisement, punishment, torment. That's why some of the translations could have the word torment, punishment, perhaps with the idea of deprivation. But as you can see, it talks about a punishment that fits the one punished, if you will, almost fits the crime, right? So if you're taking a good look at this word, it's really about correction, and it's a completely different word than that Hebrews word that goes with the person was racked. Okay, so I'm just further emphasizing that when you see punishment or torment in your Bibles, it's not this word. So when you come to Hebrews 11:35 in the Old King James, or pretty much any version, right, they use the word tortured. Yeah, but it's a very specific word, okay? That is the tympany word, all right? The punishment one isn't. Now there's another one. And this is in Revelation 20, verse 10, okay? And is obviously where it talks about being cast into the lake of fire and of sulfur, right? Where the beast and the false prophet are, and they were tormented. Notice the word here isn't tortured specifically in the translation that you're seeing here, but the word again is different. But no tympany. This is basanos. This is a different kind of word, and it also entails punishment, but it's more of about interrogation, straining, difficulty, testing. Okay. So if you were to be interrogated by police, or if you were working out, right, and let's say normally you go running around the block twice, and one day you say, I'm going to go 4 times. You could use this word because you're putting a lot of strain on yourself. Okay. It's a testing, right? And I'll show you that that's what that means. So it can be used as, an interrogation, a torturing, but it's usually with the idea, right, of almost getting the truth out or for benefit in the long run, right? Because, it sounds vile, obviously, with the way the word is, but you get what I'm saying. And I'll show you how this is used. Okay, so to torture, but notice is I examine, right? It's like a cross-examination. That's a trial kind of a thing, right? As by torture, I torment, I buffet as of waves. Okay, so I was waves. Yes, it was used, for example, here, look at Matthew 14:24, the battered by the waves of the sea. This is when when the disciples were in the boat and all of a sudden the waves really started coming, and it says tossed, right? The waves were battering. You can use this word, basanos, right? It's torturing, it's testing, it's trying, it's pressing on the boat, right? And then they're freaking out because they think they're going, hey, we could die here, right? That's the vibe of that word. So this is also a little bit of a flexible word, but again, it's not a timpani, right? It's a different word. It's used differently. A tormenting trial, see? So you can potentially, like I said, use this for working out when you're straining or something of this nature, or you're under a situation like being on the boat and all of a sudden the weather gets really bad. Okay, and as you can see, the original word is basanos, battered, felt, tormented, pain, straining, right? So, for example, in Mark 6:48, seeing them straining at the oars. This is when they're toiling and rowing, right? So they're straining to get the boat to shore, that kind of a thing. So this word can be used for that. But again, it's not the word that's being used in Hebrews 11:35. All right? So I wanted to show you a little furthermore, too, that if I recall correctly on this word, the tympanum word, okay? Going further into this, if I recall correctly, it's not really showing me here, but I remember seeing, by way of example, it might have said something about, but hopefully, I think I read this already, though, this wheel-shaped instrument where criminals were stretched out, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So hopefully what I've done here is showed you the different words for that. And when you kind of go to Hebrews 11:35, right, and you read this, you can now be confident that this word attaches to 2 Maccabees. Okay? So, for today, I'm going to leave it there for you because ultimately this is what I want to say. It's up to you whether or not you want to read the other 7 books that are in the Bible that we now call the Catholic Bible. But keep in mind, folks, that originally the Catholic Church was the universal church. It wasn't until in and around 1500 that the Protestant movement began. And when that happened, I'm going to suggest that's when the removal of books began to occur. So, what I'm hoping we've accomplished here is to at least inform you that there is a quote out of the book of Hebrews, an inspired epistle according to all Christian theologians, that is quoting directly out of 2 Maccabees. And I'm going to suggest to you that if the Hebrews writer is quoting out of 2 Maccabees, then 2 Maccabees must be an inspired book. We can't say that Hebrews is inspired, but what he's quoting from is not. That would be really conflicting. And I'm going to take it a step further and suggest, well, what am I going to do with 2 Maccabees if I don't have 1 Maccabees? Because clearly the 2 Maccabees comes after the 1 Maccabees. So that's 2 books in the original 73-book canonized Bible that I'm going to suggest that I can make a really strong case are inspired. And if that's the case, I have to tell you through circumstantial evidence at this point, and this is my position, you don't have to hold it, but from my position is if you remove 2 books that I believe you shouldn't have removed because the Hebrews writer is quoting out of Maccabees, then I'm going to suggest then that tells me you probably shouldn't have removed any. From an Old Testament perspective, I want those historical accounts. I want more of those Hebrew texts of the Old Testament, as many as I can get on my get into my hands because the Messiah came as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. He's a Jewish Messiah. So therefore, I think the more information we have in those Hebraic texts, the better. And if I have a Hebrews book in my New Testament that is quoting out of the Maccabee books, then I'm going to suggest I should have those books at my hands and let me make the decision as to what kind of inspiration it might give me. Because if you're willing to remove two books that I don't believe you should have, based on the fact that it's being quoted in the New Testament, then I'm going to suggest strongly, I don't think you should have taken any of them out. And maybe the Protestants, they doth protested too much, dare I say it. So what I'm going to suggest to you is you think about it. If you're conflicted about it, then don't read the other 7 books. I don't necessarily think we need them. If I was to tell you what I really think we need, right, is primarily the New Testament, faith in God, trust in Christ, hope and resurrection, and some of those New Testament instructions, right, on basically that center around do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. However, if we're going to dig into the history and God's plan from the time of, let's say, Adam onward, right? And then, of course, choosing Israel and talking about the promises he made to Abraham that eventually brought in the Christ, then I'm going to suggest to you all those Old Testament texts should be at a Christian's fingertips. And I'm going to suggest to you that if you do want to continue your learning, a little bit more learning, and you're interested, don't let anybody tell you that you can't read those other 7 books, not based on any kind of denomination. Folks, I'm a non-denominational kind of person. I'm not offended at Catholics nor Protestants. However, when it comes to the choosing of which Bible I'm going to read, I think I get to make some decisions based on what my own heart, mind, soul, and spirit are guiding me as. And I think I got some legitimate reason to think I should be reading both 1st and 2nd Maccabees. And I don't mind saying that is moving me to study on my own time. I've never used them in any other video. This is the first time I've used them, but I'm connecting it to our New Testament. I think that that's fair and proper. And this is an informative video for you to make your own decision. What do you think you should do? Do you think you should read 2nd Maccabees? And if so, would you not want to read 1st and 2nd Maccabees? And maybe that's a hint to you that maybe they shouldn't have been removing those books. And I'm going to suggest to you that that is indeed the case. I leave that with you. I hope that if for no other reason, this was informative for you to understand that it was books that were removed, not books that were added. Because no matter what you think of a denomination, we should always do our best to speak truth as accurately as we can. And best as I can tell, in my studies, those books were there before. There was 73 books and 7 were removed. And I've just discovered recently that one of them is quoted in our New Testament. So I personally do have a copy of the New Revised Standard Version, the Catholic edition, keeping in mind that the word Catholic means universal. I know we see it as Roman Catholic now. Well, the Roman Catholics do still have all 73 books. And so for me, I don't look at the denomination. I look at, well, hold on a second here. If books were removed and there's quotes out of my New Testament that's quoting the Old Testament and I don't have those books, that puts me at a disadvantage. And I don't want to be in a disadvantage when I'm studying the scriptures. All right? So if for no other reason I've given you the information, you can do with this information whatever you see fit, what's most appropriate for you. If you want to stick with just the 66 books, no problem. This is the first video where I've even talked about any books outside of it. However, I was led to do so because of the Hebrews text. And so in that, it has moved me to say, well, when I want to expand some of my Old Testament studies, I am going to include the other 7 books in my studies. And you might want to do the same, but that's up to you because you get to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. I just wanted to provide you the information, and I don't think we should use any kind of denomination issues. We should just look at the ideas, the facts, right? And the fact is, the Hebrews writer is quoting out of 2nd Maccabees. That's just the facts. That was right out of Bible Hub. So if they're quoting out of 2nd Maccabees, I have plenty of reason to want to be able to read those Old Testament texts. So I'm going to suggest to you that the information is in your hands. Hopefully this will be helpful and edifying for you to at least discover things on your own and think about whether or not you should be studying those texts or not. I don't mind telling you, I am going to be doing that on my off time when I want to study more Old Testament texts. I'm going to use those scriptures as well to add to the repertoire. And I've been, thus far, I haven't done them all, but I've been finding them very edifying. And I think we saw a great example of edification just now. And so hopefully that was edifying for you and inspiring for you, and gives you the opportunity to think for yourself whether or not you want to go ahead and read the other 7 books. So in the meantime, guys, remember, no matter what, we live by love God and love your neighbor as yourself. That's what we care mostly about. We care about the resurrection of Christ. And of course, what we also care deeply about is that as you walk in this journey and in this life, try your best to do all things with grace and peace.